Today we will be looking at endpoint protection and how using real-time detection and automation can help to defend your IT and OT endpoints. We will also understand where it can help with obsolete or out-of-vendor support devices. I'm pleased to have Anthony Lee from Fortinet joining me on today's webcast. Anthony will run us through Fortinet's EDR solution and how it helps combine real-time protection from malicious activities, as well as the critical detection and response capabilities needed as part of a layered security architecture. I'll let Anthony make his own introductions as we get further into the webcast. But firstly, I'm Darren Clare, I'm Director of Accelerate Technologies. We're helping organizations to identify and achieve cyber and digital resilience. And we do that through a blend of security assessments, cyber skills transfer, and vendor technologies. So just a quick run through on what we will look to cover on today's webcast. We'll briefly understand the threat posed with out of support software, and obviously the increasing vulnerability of those endpoint devices, and of course the importance of keeping up to date with the latest security patches as well. Anthony will then take us through the evolution of endpoint protection, early pain points that we've seen from some EDR solutions, obviously created by increased levels of visibility, and then obviously leading on to the strong point in case for the use of automation technologies to assist security teams. So that will be under the to automate or not to automate. We'll then get a run through of what we will see as the impressive capabilities of FortiEDR, with a brief demo of the solution and the IoT asset tracking and automated diffuse and contain features within that. And finally, Anthony will also describe the capabilities of FortiResponder. FortiResponder is Fortinet's managed detection and response offering, and that's how teams of experts are on hand to deliver the 24/7 monitoring, triage, and incident remediation for organizations that need that extra level of support. So software lifecycle. So we know at some point in time, the software lifecycle will eventually become out of date and out of support. After which point, the ideal thing from a security perspective is to just not use that software anymore. But in many situations, that is just not easier. It's always easier said than done. And so, for example, this could be where we've got expensive industry-related equipment, been designed to be IoT connected through maybe Windows or Linux operating systems. So today we'll look at some of the consequences when the life cycle of the industrial equipment outlives that of the software, and obviously upgrading that software, replacing the equipment is just not an option. We see using obsolete software, it clearly increases an organization's vulnerability to being compromised. The vulnerability is compounded by the fact that the software will no longer receive security updates from its developers. Increases the likelihood that exploitable vulnerabilities will become known to hackers. And the latest security vulnerabilities are present in older software, increasing that impact of vulnerabilities and obviously making exploitation more likely to succeed as well. So in combination, these issues mean that you've got high impact security incidents becoming more likely to occur. These could include malware, exploiting vulnerabilities, which can also cause a huge impact across an entire organization. I mean, so recent events we've seen, Honda as an example, we recently saw them in the news. That's a typical example of how potentially malware can cripple an organization's business operations. So with understanding the vulnerabilities, we can look at some of the most common remediation actions to take to reduce the risk of compromise and obviously limit the impact as well. Ideally, if it's possible, we should look to migrate or upgrade from the obsolete software, but we know that this can be a huge challenge. If we can isolate the device from any untrusted networks or sensitive services, so we call that network zoning, this would obviously reduce the chances of compromise. Perhaps we could limit the communication channels to the affected device. So a lot of devices may have email, web browsing, may even have access to file shares of importance, or even any removable devices, USB sticks, whatever that might be. We even see organizations potentially converting these vulnerable machines to thin client devices. This gives you a much better option to restrict the access channels and obviously protect with firewalls and such. But finally, we look at the protective monitoring capabilities to help to detect and isolate threats quickly. And this is where we'll look at FortiEDR today and FortiResponder. So this feels like probably the best time to introduce Anthony, hopefully to expand on the protective monitoring capabilities of how FortiEDR provides that additional layer of security. So over to you, Anthony.
Thanks, Darren. So yeah, hello everybody, and yeah, good to be here. So quick introduction. I'm Anthony Lee, one of the systems engineers at Fortinet. I've been in and around the cybersecurity market for coming up for the best part of 20 years, working across a number of vendors, and most recently I've been involved in vendors that have had products and tools for incident response and endpoint detection, and it's still a very growing and interesting market when you look at cybersecurity from an attacker's perspective and also from a defensive capability. So it's a really interesting topic we've got today. So if we look at the evolution of the endpoint protection platform market, it's gone through a number of changes over the last few years, and I think it's quite important just to take a step back and look at it from the attackers' tactics, techniques, and procedures, and some of the things they're doing in order to understand why the EPP and the EDR, endpoint detection and response products are starting to come together. So a lot of the procedures the malware authors and the bad guys are using aren't really changing dramatically, but a lot of the industry trends are still evolving. When you think about things like machine learning and artificial intelligence, but also the amount of organizations that are migrating to the cloud. So the attackers are getting more adept at working across a range of different operating systems, various device types, both on-premise and cloud architectures. And those traditional barriers to success for the malware authors are starting to lessen over time. So in essence, the attackers can do more things in more diverse environments. And what we know from analysing a lot of the malware families over the last couple of years is that the majority of them are unknown, which means that the malware authors are innovating and trying to evade the detection technologies. You know, they're not really just relying on updates to existing malware. So if you think of the way cyber criminals are increasingly turning to things like ransomware as a source of income, it creates quite an interesting space. Now the good news is that a lot of the organizations we speak to are actually finding and containing attackers, and the number of incidents discovered internally is improving as well, as opposed to a tap on the shoulder from a third party or a government agency, or even worse, reading about yourselves in the press, which can be very damaging. And that shows that the industry that we're all in and organizations are generally getting better at cybersecurity, and that there isn't really a single reason for this, but I think more visibility and more awareness across the entire security spectrum are really starting to help. And also, I think organizations are taking cybersecurity a lot more serious and actually investing more in their security programs. So like I said, the EPP market's gone through a few different rounds of disruption and reinvention over the past few years. So the traditional endpoint protection market that focused on prevention and relied heavily on signature-based antivirus is where this kind of started. And then when you start blending in the EDR solution, it sort of elevates the conversation to a business level. And I think a lot of the board of directors and C-levels were really getting involved because of the very nature of high-profile data breaches and the fact that threats can really hang around in organisations for several months or even years. So I think the industry realised that prevention alone is probably not enough, and they need detection and response as well. And that's when that convergence really started happening. That's the situation we're in today. EPP moving in line with EDR. And if you look at Gartner as well, I think they just do a magic quadrant for EPP, which incorporates part of EDR as well. So if we look at, just before we get into the products we're talking about, if you look at some of the pain points, as it says that we all know there's no such thing as 100% prevention. And the threat landscape is changing slightly with things, you know, big increase in ransomware and data theft and business disruption. But if we speak to organizations and we ask, almost on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are they in their ability to detect a cyber breach? It sort of depends on the level of maturity and the things they're trying to protect. But in terms of actual endpoints being compromised, we do see the vast majority of organizations are struggling to keep track of the amount of endpoints that are being compromised. And then we add in things like a very complex ecosystem, multiple vendors, and, you know, throw in security solutions at the problem and hoping it solves it. Whereas actually we don't feel any more secure in our maturity and efficacy, which starts coming back to things like incident response. So the question is really, you know, we know breaches are bad and breaches cost money and they can be very disruptive to businesses. But to stop and prevent breaches, you've got to start taking things like incident response quite seriously and understand how to do it. I think there's also a skill shortage. To do incident response properly, you need to have experience and know what you're looking for. Otherwise, it can be like looking for a needle in a haystack. But I think, again, the good news is some of the EDR tools that we're talking about really make that process a lot more straightforward, and we'll come on to that in the demo. So it gets to the point where fairly junior SOC analysts can identify very quickly where the breaches are coming from. Are they targeted? What data is at risk? And then move on to the more important day-to-day activities that are needed. So that's some of the pain points that we're talking about. And then if we look at automation is a really interesting topic at the minute. You know, like I say, we want to stop the breach, and we want to incorporate elements of automation, but at the same time, we want to make sure there's no false positives. So if you look at things like WannaCry that, you know, infected hundreds of thousands of computers in 24 hours, and there's various other tools and examples out there that are, you know, in the press all the time, that are very fast moving. So I think when we're talking about automation, we're trying to reduce that window of exposure, but also make sure we're getting the best out of the resources that we've got. And like I said, there is a general skill shortage out there in the industry. So let's try and automate elements of our processes. And an example might be, you know, if you've got a mailbox set up for users to send spam to, somebody has to be there to monitor that mailbox, make sure it's coming from a valid user, maybe check it against VirusTotal to see what it's saying, maybe open a help desk ticket and pass it through to second line, and then provide some contextual intelligence on it from a targeted attack perspective as well. So there's a lot involved in automation. and it's a really growing area, along with things like I say, like machine learning and artificial intelligence as well. So if I talk about the Fortinet EDR product, Fortinet acquired an organization called Ensilo in 2019, which is one of the market leaders in the EDR space. And what's really compelling about this solution is it deals with both pre-infection and post-compromise protection as well. So that starts differentiating us in the fact that we can automatically diffuse that any potential threat as soon as we detect it. So because we're doing that in real time to stop the breach, we can be very, very good at preventing ransomware, things like ransomware encryption as well, and also file exfiltration. So we don't quarantine the entire endpoint. We're not doing that unless it's completely necessary. And the whole point of that is buying us that valuable time in terms of that window of exposure. Making sure we're validating the suspect, but also reducing that noise that can quite often be the case when you're getting multiple alerts coming through and not much context around any of them. Once we've confirmed it's malicious, we'll then start moving on to the response phase, and we'll start using the playbooks to automate. And the automated playbooks are contextual as well, so you can really start designing your incident response process based on the risk tolerance of the actual endpoint or of the category of the threat, and it makes for quite a compelling solution there. So that's the real-time protection. And again, just highlighting the automated versus manual process. So as I was saying, you can very quickly start writing some of these processes down in terms of the manual response and putting times against it. And if you're doing manual endpoint detection response, you can start measuring that and seeing how long it takes to detect the threats. And the average amount of time it takes to confirm if something is a data breach. And like I say, if you need to triage the alert, enrich it, validate it, escalate it, and then manually block it, the very best case, you might be talking a couple of hours for that, possibly even longer. And if you're getting multiple incidents like that coming in a day, it can very quickly overwhelm a security operations center or an analyst. So that's where the automation piece comes in, again, in terms of diffusing that threat in real time and allowing you to do that real contextual threat intelligence and threat hunting and investigating. So this is quite an interesting summary slide, and if you think about the modern endpoint protection platform and in terms of what are the actual common requirements, prevent, detect and respond, they're all very important. Where FortiEDR goes above and beyond is on that pre and post infection protection. So as I was saying, in terms of diffusing a threat, stopping the ransomware, preventing the data exfiltration, and actually making sure that there's no business disruption to your organization, because at that stage we don't necessarily want to quarantine everything and take things off the network until we've actually validated it and confirmed that there is a malicious threat. And once it's confirmed, that's where the playbook's going to kick in. And we can start, really predicting where some of the attacks are coming from. So here's an example of one of the processes that we're doing, and I'll come on to this in the demo as well. So the system sees something suspicious, we'll validate it and turn it into an inclusion. And if you look over down in the right hand corner, you can see we've sort of recategorized something to safe, and I think in this particular example it took less than 4 seconds, and you can see the timestamps there as well. So that's what I'm talking about when I say we don't really disrupt the business, and it's done very, very quickly and in real time. In terms of the guided interface as well, so I've talked a lot about the skill shortage on various SOC teams, and we know that organisations can't hire people fast enough to specialise in this area, and when they do actually recruit analysts, they're quite often junior and fairly new to the whole incident response process, and that's where it can quite often be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Whereas with FortiEDR, we've got a very comprehensive guided interface, and that's the example we're looking at here. So for this particular threat, we've seen multiple suspicious or malicious behaviours, and in this case, it's process hollowing, and it sort of explains what process hollowing is. We can map it to the MITRE techniques, and we've got a link there to take you through to that. And if you look at the red text as well, that gives you really helpful hints and best practice, and tells the analyst what they might want to do next in terms of the investigation process. Okay, and then Darren talked a little bit about the FortiResponder services as well. So all the topics I discussed earlier can be brought into FortiResponder services as well, and in terms of a managed service. And what that brings you is that 24/7 monitoring and response. So this is really helpful for continuous threat monitoring, alert triage, incident handling, all the things we've been talking about, but by Fortinet's experienced analysts and the actual platform. And this is really designed to help companies defeat the most advanced attacks, and be that extra pair of eyes for an organization. So some of the key capabilities of the MDR are the 24/7 monitoring response, round the clock coverage, and again, it frees up organization security teams to focus on the more strategic tasks and the day-to-day running of the IT networks. Alert triage with guided response as well. So the FortiResponder MDR team can help to supplement customers' security operation centers. So we'll act as the senior SOC analyst for customers, and we'll go through the whole guided remediation instructions as well. We'll also do things like remote remediation and rollback. So it's quite a powerful solution. The way we actually do that, we'll take a look at everything that's getting detected and blocked by the FortiEDR tool. We'll then do a bunch of cloud analysis on those alerts to see if there's any related events, that the files are submitted through to our cloud network, and we'll do further analysis and inspection. We'll then start classifying and confirming some of the threats. So all the time we're reducing the amount of alerts and the noise, and making sure that it is contextual and relevant information. Then we'll start bringing in some of the automation that we've talked about in terms of notifying users, opening tickets, remediating. And then finally, we'll do that investigation piece if it does require further inspection. And that's where the FortiResponder teams are there to assist and help. So I'll just build this one out completely. So just a bit of a summary. So it really helps to accelerate that SOC maturity. When you go into a security operations center, you quite often see analysts with 2 or 3 screens, and we call it the swivel chair scenario. And bouncing around between different screens and alerts coming in all over the place. So the FortiResponder benefits really try to pinpoint what's important, and make sure they're doing the actual job they're employed to do, rather than the repeatable tasks, and looking for that low volume but high risk that could be a foot in a door that could cause potentially a lot of damage to an organization. So I'd say that those are the FortiResponder benefits. Just a quick use case here, and this is quite an important one in terms of some of the industries and verticals that we're seeing, but also in terms of the use cases that we've talked about. So this particular electronics and manufacturing company, a lot of the threats were bypassing their existing AV solution, but that second line jumps out at me: under continuous state of attack, 3% infection rate. And what that tells me is that if you look at the actual kill chain in terms of reconnaissance all the way through to exfiltration, the attackers will do their homework and they're highly targeted, and there's usually somebody behind the keyboard somewhere that's done their homework, and will do a lot of that reconnaissance in terms of trying to understand how an organization is set up to defend against the attacks, and how the attacker can evade them and bypass them in whatever methodology they choose. So if you kick them out, they're going to return. And again, it's giving you that visibility of some of the vulnerable systems with legacy manufacturing applications, and some of the things Darren spoke about at the beginning are quite important in terms of this actual vertical. So yeah, a nice use case there. So I'll jump over to a demo. I think Darren, I think you're still presenting.
Yeah, let me just do that now. Okay, good. You should be presenting now.
Yep, thank you. Okay, so I'll just log into the system, and what you're looking at right now is the management console. This can be cloud hosted or installed on premise or in your own cloud or hybrid. All the features are the same look and feel. It's got an incredibly lightweight agent that's installed on Windows, Mac, or Linux endpoints. That collector agent consumes roughly about 60 meg of hard disk space, and in terms of memory, it's about 70 to 100 meg of RAM. So it is incredibly light. And what makes the solution fairly unique is up here in the security policies. So if you look at these 4 default policies, and I'll just expand a couple of them so you can really see what's involved. The acquisition that Fortinet made last year was Ensilo. That they actually had about 45 different patents for kernel-based protection on the endpoint. The reason that's very significant is it means that there's kernel-based security into all the processes, all the apps running, all the disk read and write, memory read and write, all the registry read and write. Everything's being interrogated in that same way. So it makes it quite a compelling story. And with kernel-based inspection, you can see absolutely every running process. It also makes it very unique and means that it sort of runs quite well on online environments, as well as anything that's completely isolated. So we talked a little on the use case I showed you, the manufacturing one, in terms of their OT capabilities. You know, the whole thing can be run offline and isolated. So those are the default policies, and you can see ransomware, device control. But if we actually go into a couple of these things and see what we're talking about, so I've got a couple of events here, and if I take a look at this badfile.exe, and I'll look over here, I can see that this is, you know, I can see that there's a file read-write attempt up here. So that's going to be your traditional, your classic antivirus scenario where a file's written to the hard disk. So that's something that we can stop, and you'd expect us to stop. But then if I take a look at this event, which is a little bit more interesting, there's a lot, for a start, there's a lot more things going on here, and I'll just expand a couple of them. And I can see that it's triggered a few different rules. So I can see the ransomware prevention rule has been triggered. I I can see that process hollowing that we talked about earlier has happened. Again, a malicious file's detected, and you can see the whole chain of events taking place here. And if I zoom in here, I can see various files being created. But I can also see this right at the end there, the background.jpg. And in terms of ransomware, that for this particular malware, that could be the ransom note that's trying to drop onto the hard drive and say, your endpoint's been encrypted, you have to pay a fee to release it. So I can see the chain of events happening there. If I actually select these three and go into the forensics, I can break them out into those three events again, and I can see exactly what's happening. So there's the process following. I can also look at it from a stacks point of view to break it down. So let's have a look at a few of these. Again, I can see various things happening. If I wanted to send it over to VirusTotal, I could click there and check it. So that brings in that contextual intelligence that I was talking about. Let's have a look. I can see the different processes. And this one down here, and I've sort of done this a few times, so I sort of know what I'm looking for. But if you look at the shadow copy, it's actually trying to delete that before it does anything. So delete the shadows, all of them, very quietly and very quickly. So we know straight away that that's malicious and needs blocking. And then in terms of actual incident response and EDR, and particularly around the detection and response piece, if we look at some of the response options, so it's things like, do I want to retrieve a copy in memory? Do I want to remediate? Do I want to delete the file? Do I want to clean up the registry or terminate the process? Do I want to isolate the network? Just over there. What things do I want to do to that compromised endpoint? But what's more interesting is those automated playbooks that I've talked about. And this is saying, what do I want to do on these events? And if we take a look at them, we can terminate the process, we can delete the file, but clean the persistent data, and that actually cleans up anything residual that's been added to the register before the malware starts behaving badly, which is quite powerful. Or maybe we want to automatically isolate the device and move them to maybe a more high secure group. So the advantage of that is you don't need to run your EDR console to decide what response you want to do. It can all be done automatically. And then I'll just quickly jump over to the communication control, which is quite powerful as well. So this gives you a list. So this gives you a running list of everything that's on the endpoint and everything that's communicating. So for example, I've got a list of all the applications that are running on my network. If I switch it over, so that's showing everything. If I switch it over to the critical ones, I can see I've got a couple of issues with Google Chrome and Firefox. And these are things that have got a very high reputation, very well-known browsers, but we can see the different versions that are running, who's got access to those versions, where they're communicating to. But where it gets interesting is if I pick one of them, I can see the actual vulnerabilities and links through to the MITRE website as well, where you can learn more about them. So what you can do is modify the action and say, you can have access to Firefox or Chrome, but this particular version can't communicate. So effectively, you're putting a stop on that communication and forcing the end user to upgrade. So I'll probably leave it there. That's quite a brief demo, but hopefully it gives you an idea and a flavor of some of the capabilities of the EDR tool. And I will hand back to you, Darren.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anthony. Much appreciated. Right, let's just move this. Brilliant. Hopefully you can see my slides again. Great. So, so Anthony, thanks very much. So really strong solution with FortiEDR. Clearly, really comprehensive in terms of features. Just one quick question before we actually get into the other questions is what sort of operating systems and devices does FortiEDR support, and how far back does it go with Windows? Do you know that?
Yeah, that's a good question. In terms of operating systems, we sort of cover the main ones: Windows, Mac, Linux endpoints, and in terms of going back, it's very important from a detection and response perspective, because a lot of the attackers, as I was talking about, do their homework and do their reconnaissance, and will particularly target some of the old obsolete versions of operating systems, knowing that fundamentally that there's weaknesses and vulnerabilities there. So I think from an attacker perspective, that's a key way to get into a network, get that foot in the door. So yeah, absolutely, we'll cover the obsolete, the old ones, and from a protection perspective, that's incredibly important.
Okay, brilliant. So yeah, because I noticed on the demo there was Windows 7, so there's obviously as far back as Windows 7, which went out of support January this year, I believe. It went out of support with Microsoft, so that's good. Brilliant. Okay, so just to briefly, before we go on to the questions, I just wanted to briefly talk around Accelerate's security assessments. So we have we do security assessments to industry best practices or frameworks, and it's really there to help organizations to understand their current security maturity, especially the ones that are looking to obviously improve their maturity as well. But in many scenarios, we're talking about sort of out of date, out of support devices and operating systems. One of the biggest challenges is firstly understanding what it is you have on your network. Locating those out of support devices, and then once you've actually located them, then actually try and understand what sort of processes you need to put in place, what security controls that might take in with education of people. It might also be the technology like FortiEDR that needs to support the protection of those devices as well. So you can understand a little bit more about our security assessments on our website, which is accelerate-technologies.com, and then there's a assessments page just to understand exactly what it is it gives you based on different frameworks, whether it's Cyber Essentials Plus or whether it's a NIST-based framework, right through to sort of custom ISO 27001 as well. So, right, questions. Let's see what we have that we've got coming in. So Anthony, yeah, one question here I've got. So if I was to take on a FortiEDR solution, isn't that just adding another point product to my security stack? And isn't that likely to increase my security team's workload rather than reduce it?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that's very topical at the minute, and we see a lot of in the industry. And if you look at the network security evolution, I'd say we're almost in the third generation, whereby the first generation was, cast your mind back many years, was all around connection firewalls, and that's where Fortinet started making a name for themselves, especially when we moved to the second generation in terms of content and next gen firewalls and UTM. I'd say the third generation of this evolution is all around infrastructure platform, and really being able to give that broad visibility. And if we speak to various organizations and CISOs, their sort of thoughts are that if their company has to work harder at systems integration and forming a patchwork from various niche security vendors, it can be an expensive resourcing issue, and B, it's that same problem where you just throw in solutions at it hoping to solve it. So what we're seeing is the vendors that are being very successful have to have this infrastructure platform in place, and Fortinet have got an entire security fabric because we've been built from the ground up and been involved in those at the edge with our firewall. The Fortinet security fabric gives you that full protection across your entire digital infrastructure. We've got the network at the core of that fabric, and that's going to enable a myriad of different security use cases. So everything from next gen firewall through to segmentation and SD-WAN, but also some of these new and emerging trends we're seeing around things like EDR and artificial intelligence and machine learning and OT. So I think you have to have a solid platform in place, and Fortinet are front and center of that at the moment.
Brilliant, that's great. That's the only question. So on that note, well, again, thank you very much, Anthony, for joining us today. Really, really insightful on what Fortinet can offer, especially around FortiEDR. Yeah, so thanks again.
Thank you.